Welcome to the Bare Naked Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Simmons. I am a psychologist, humanitarian, and entrepreneur. The Bare Naked Podcast is about truth and authenticity. It's about creating an atmosphere where we can boldly talk about our challenges without judgment. The goal is to have courageous conversations that inspire healing and understanding. Please join us each week as we dare to bear it all. Welcome to the Bare Naked Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Simmons. In today's episode, we'll be discussing a very interesting topic that you may or may not be familiar with. But before we begin, let me ask you a few questions. Have you ever felt inadequate, not good enough, or incompetent, even though the evidence suggests otherwise? Have you ever thought, oh, it's only a matter of time before they realize that I really don't belong here? Or have you ever questioned whether you're truly qualified for that job, that promotion, or even the accomplishment? If so, stick around. This episode is for you. Today, we'll be talking about imposter syndrome. This is basically when a person doubts their ability, their accomplishments, and their experience despite evidence suggesting otherwise. It's feeling like a fraud or even though you're not, right? And it's fearing that someone will somehow expose you as being a fraud. When you experience imposter syndrome, you tend to attribute your success to external factors like, oh, maybe this person's just being nice. Oh, well, I got the hookup from my mom or dad. You attribute it to luck and maybe even timing. I was just at the right place at the right time. Instead of attributing it to your own hard work, your talents, and your efforts. Imposter syndrome can cause you to feel inadequate, stressed, anxious, and even depressed. And it can affect your self esteem and overall sense of well being. In my experience as a psychologist, I've met many brilliant, talented, and accomplished individuals who suffer from imposter syndrome. The world sees them as doctors and lawyers, nurses, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, so forth and so on. But they see themselves as inadequate, not good enough, or somehow falling short. Despite all of their accomplishments, despite all of the accolades, these amazing individuals still bear this feeling of being frauds or not living up to the expectations. Today, I am honored to have with me two remarkable women who are doing great things in their respective areas. Yet, they've both acknowledged to me and they've admitted to me that they are, in fact, familiar with the feelings of imposter syndrome, of feeling like an imposter. Our first guest is Grace Simmons. Grace Simmons is a travel mindset coach and is the founder of Amethyst Palava Hut. Through travel, Grace has learned confidence building strategies like self-advocacy, resilience, and setting boundaries to protect her wellness, all of which have been tested and reinforced in the workplace. Now, Grace's passion of travel and personal development combined to help single women who feel disconnected from their authentic selves adapt a solo traveler mindset so that they can live with joy and ease without fear of the unknown. I like that. On her podcast, the Random and Wonderful podcast with Grace Simmons, she brings you on her confidence building journey and invites guests to share how they turn barriers into opportunities and to advocate for themselves. So check that podcast out. It's wonderful, by the way. Our second guest is Cinthia Andujar. Cinthia is a licensed associate counselor working toward her LPC. And for those who are unfamiliar with that, it's licensed professional counselor. She graduated with her master's in clinical mental health counseling in 2023. Whoop, whoop. That was 2021 rather, fairly recently. She is an amazing mother, a trusted friend, and really, truly one of the kindest human beings that I've been blessed to know. Welcome, Grace and Cinthia.
Thank you so much.
No problem. So we're talking about imposter syndrome. And before we begin, I kind of want to just ask you if there's anything in particular that you would like the audience to know about you that we may not have covered.
I think you covered it all for me.
I'm good. I'm just like you said. I'm working towards my licensed professional counselor license, and I eventually will have my own private practice. That's it.
Nice. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I guess a little question for the two of you before we get into this topic of imposter syndrome. And that question is basically what inspired your current career path? Like, what made you, if you pivoted, what made you pivot? And if you've always been on this track, what led you on this path?
So I can go first if you'd like. I think my upbringing, I've always kind of felt out of place, and I was like, is there something wrong with me? So when I got the opportunity to go back to school, I chose psychology, right? Because I think every person who chooses psychology really wants to figure out themselves,
Mhm,
right? Really,
mhm,
first and foremost. So
mhm,
I'm like, my interest was, let me see if maybe there is something wrong with me, and if there is, let me see how I can fix it, right?
mhm. Yeah.
So I went to school. Um, it took me a long time to finish school because I went to school. My daughter was 6 years old, and I, kind of was doing the part-time
Mhm,
college thing.
mhm,
So, as I was going through taking my psychology courses, I was experiencing life. So, with all the barriers and all the obstacles, I was like, you know what? I'll take this into like a counseling
mhm,
career instead, because I feel like as a single mother, if I can accomplish so much and overcome so much, like, toxic abuse and domestic abuse and being a single mother and all that, I think I can help others. So it started out as me trying to figure myself out, like, is there something wrong with me? And it finished with kind of like, let me share with others what I have experienced.
mhm.
Mm.
So that's what kind of, brought me to where I am today.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. One of the things that I know personally is that you've been, in school since 2007, we're now in 2023. So really just a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And I imagine there were probably times along the way where you thought, when's the end? When
Yeah.
will it be over? But you really persisted and, I what kind of led you to persist that way?
Well, like I said, so when my daughter was born, I decided to go back to school when she was at the age of, school age.
Mhm,
And I kind of thought, like, if I want to teach my daughter that, an education is important, and if I can do it as a single mother,
mhm,
then you can do it. So it was so funny because, she was in first grade when I started school, and she graduated college 2 years. She just graduated with her bachelor's 2 years after I finished my master's.
yeah,
So I think I really, really wanted to instill in her that no matter what life throws at you, you can, once you start, also, like, once you start something, finish it, no matter what life throws at you. So
yeah,
that's the lesson that I wanted to teach her.
yeah,
And I think that she got it. She got her bachelor's, and she's going to go towards her doctorate. She wants to go straight to a PhD.
mhm,
So I felt like I had to prove to her, like, no matter what life throws at you,
yeah,
you conquer.
yeah,
Having God in your, like, first God, and a relationship with God, and then, like, just continue to persevere, because you can do it. But it took me a long time. There were times that I was like, oh, when is this going to be over? But I
mhm,
the thought of quitting never crossed my mind.
Mm.
I was like, I'm not gonna quit. I'm gonna
Mhm.
keep going, even if I have to cut down classes, or it may take me longer, but it's not about the race. It's about the journey. It's not how fast you get there. It's about the journey. So I was blessed enough to finish school,
Mhm.
and I was blessed enough to kind of get into the field that I want to,
Yeah.
that I thought that I would be a benefit to other people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That had me all emotional just thinking your why, your purpose, at least for a particular season, was knowing that I want to be a good role model for my daughter. I want
Yeah,
to demonstrate what it is to persist and to continue all the way through to the finish line. And
yeah,
I I've known Adi, your daughter, now since she was, I don't know what grade she was in.
like third.
Third grade? It's incredible to see her, going into graduate school and wanting to pursue her PhD. She's just brilliant. So it's just wonderful. And 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 Grace, for you. So a little known secret, Grace, you can share kind of like your pivot. But one of the things that I want to say before I forget to say it here is how you've inspired me to kind of take that extra leap of faith,
Oh, thank
to
you.
do the podcast that I've been thinking about for way too long. And I know that, like, just your courage, right? So, like, full disclosure, this is my baby sis. She's not a baby, but I still say baby sis. And to see you kind of like do what you're doing now, and just do it with so much passion and do it with so much grace, was just such an inspiration. When you kind of would send me little nudges and little reminders, and I'm like, that's my girl. So I want to publicly thank you for that before you add, what may have, if you've pivoted in your career path, and if so, what inspired it.
Well, that was really sweet. I'm glad I inspired you. So, trying not to. Now I need my tissue. So for me, that pivot was I was working as an administrative assistant, and from what I've gotten over the past the 4 years that I was doing it, it was very much like a supportive role. That's just who I am as a person. I like, being encouraging and all that good stuff. But the problem is the area that I was in was very toxic. There wasn't a lot of space to grow, expand. Um, and I just felt really stuck. And so it was actually in 2019, I think. I happened to go on, like a cousin and I went skydiving.
Hmm.
And I remember just as we were falling out of the plane, just having this like epiphany of one, how humbled and small I am in the entire scale of this wonderful planet that God's put us on. And
Yeah.
then two, why would I limit myself to such a backbreaking job when I can visually see from this, like being that high up, that there's so much more out there. And I remember coming back to work that next week. And I was just like, I don't understand how we're all doing this. Like,
Mhm.
we need to do more, guys. And so, well, I could share a little bit more later, but it's just needing that shift. And it was a definite awakening to get out of, you know what, I don't need to be in this space where I'm unappreciated, or people don't consider you as a person. You're more of an extension of furniture. You're there to just answer questions and solve things, without them actually considering you as a person. And so that was my awakening of, okay, well, what else can I do? And the first step was to leave that job and find something that actually aligned better with what I wanted to do, which is being a program manager for professional development.
Nice. That's so beautiful. I don't know if you saw the little shift in Cynthia's face there, but she can relate to that experience way, way, way too much. And that's how we met many, many, many years ago. That Cynthia was
Creative
our
assistant. Yeah.
administrative assistant for our MD, for a medical director, and also our administrative assistant for like what seemed to be the world, because everyone turned to her for everything.
Hmm.
I know when she said, she wanted to pursue psychology, I was like the happiest person on the planet Earth. because I just knew it was a right fit. So, I didn't even think about it when you both agreed to do this, but like that commonality, that thread
Yeah.
between
I
the
know. I
two,
like that that came up.
that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So,
Well,
y'all know the three of us, we can go on and on and on. So let's get into the meat. Um, if in full transparency, right? The reason why I decided to kick off the Bare Naked podcast with imposter syndrome is because it's something that hits home for me.
Mhm.
And for honestly, I think the first time that I felt like this feeling of being an imposter was in graduate school. And I had been like, academic All-American all 4 years of college. I dual majored, blah, 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 and like did really great. But then I got to grad school and like everyone was so smart. Everyone was so smart, and they came from like wealthy homes, and I did not come from that. I come from a small little country that's barely noticeable on the map. From Liberia, and just kind of thinking of my journey and being a child survivor of a civil war, and coming to the United States, and now I find myself in this really great doctor of psychology program with folks that went to like Ivy League schools, and I thought to myself, I don't know that I belong here. Like, how did I even end up here? And like,
Mm.
who spoke on my behalf? Somebody must have pulled some strings or something to get me in this space. And I'm telling you that when I think about imposter syndrome, that is the first time that it was glaring. I don't think prior to that, I felt out of place in any way. But that particular experience was such a marker for me because it made me feel like, oh man, I'm in the wrong place, and maybe
mm,
I'm not good enough, and maybe everyone else is better than me. And when it came to the podcast, in spite of the fact that like whether it was Cinthia, whether it was my sister, whether it was Grace, and my clients saying to me, Dr. Simmons, you really need to start a podcast. Like, my friends are always like, what do y'all talk about in therapy? And I try to share with them what you give us, but you just need to put it out there for the world because
Mm.
people can benefit from it. And I always said, "Oh, I'll do it." And then guess what? When the time came to do it, I would always get cold feet. So
mm,
questions like, "Oh my God, you're really gonna put yourself out there? What will people think? What if you sound stupid?" Like, all of these things kind of came across my mind, right? So it froze me for literally 5 years until this year. I'm like, you're doing it. I don't care what. You're going to just do it. Let me ask you both some questions, right? And you can take turns answering these questions. The first thing is, tell me about the first time you felt like an imposter, or about an experience that made you feel like, like an imposter. And Cynthia, you can go in, and Grace.
okay. So I think I've always felt it. I just didn't know that it was a thing.
Hmm.
I think that I've always doubted myself. And as a therapist, though, that's when it came into like full fruition, if you will, because I'm like, sometimes I'll see my clients, and actually, when I heard about imposter syndrome, one of my clients said, "I think I have imposter syndrome." And in my mind, I'm like, "What is imposter syndrome?" I didn't know what it was. I mean, I just didn't know that it was a thing. As soon as she got off, I was like Googling it. I
Yeah.
said, "Google's my best friend. What is imposter syndrome?" And then when I saw it, I was like, "Oh my God, that describes me to a T." Like that's when I realized that, that's what I had, that's what I suffered from. And so it was so like, it was like a light bulb that went off. Like, even though I have an associate's degree, even though I have a bachelor's degree, even though I have a master's degree, I still always doubt myself. I still always feel like you don't belong here, or you don't know what you're talking about. And another quick incident was when I was doing like a role play with one of my peers, and she was doing like a CBT technique. And when she kind of we kind of used like imposter syndrome as I was the client. And when she broke it down, the way she did her therapy sessions, um the way it ended, then I really doubted myself, because I was like, I'm not that therapist. Like, I don't do the technique like that, you know? And I was like, am I a good therapist? Like, oh my God, what am I doing to my client? Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. So I really, really hit home. But then she did the evidence. Like, what's the evidence that's saying that you're not smart? Because that was my theme. Like, I'm not smart. She was like, where's the evidence? You have a bachelor, you have an associate's degree, you have a bachelor's degree, you have a master's degree. Where's the evidence that you're not smart? You know? And so that's when I realized that, wow, I really do have this thing called imposter syndrome, you know? And so what I do now is I just have to continue to affirm, like, say, you got this, you know what you're doing. And my latest evidence was when I left one practice for another, I got feedback from my clients, each of them, and they each said, I connected with you. I connected with you. And so I felt like, okay, I may not know all the techniques, but I connect with my clients and I do make a difference in their lives. So that's how I kind of view it now. But I still struggle with it. I think it goes back to when I was a child, like, people placing doubts in my life, like, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you know? So
Yeah.
that's my story.
Yeah. Thank you for your truth and just being really honest and open about that. I'll
Mhm.
pause on any feedback I may have, or like follow up questions. But Grace, what about you? Tell us about a time where you felt like an imposter.
Um, so I spent almost 9 years in the Army, and my story is that let's start from college actually, in ROTC. I felt like I was surrounded by, like, everyone else knew how to be a great soldier.
Hmm.
And I just did not fit in. And so I felt like my entire military career was trying to catch up with everyone else.
Yeah.
Um, and like you mentioned, like, there's certain things that we had to do, like, orienteering or so wayfinding, navigating. I was not great at that. In the middle of being in the trees and hanging out and understanding all these different strategies, that was not my thing. But what I was better at, and I didn't put two and two together, was actually when the big soldiers would come and they would have their personal issues, and they would
Mm.
just, I don't know how to relate what I'm doing to this, or we're reservists. So I feel like I'm a big person, when I'm in the military. And then when I go to my day job, I don't know who I am then. And it just became like that was where I found that strength. Again, all of this a couple of years later, and I was like, I'm a really great coach. Um, but
Hmm.
I that's always been in the back of my head, is like, I've so many years dedicated to being a soldier and I am an officer, I should be a leader, I should be this, I should be that. And every single year, probably around when we had to do our physical test, I was just like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't, no one, I'm sure no one else believes in me or whatever. Um, but again, grateful to have people who are pulling you into that direction of like, no, no, you're fine. Like, this is just one instance. Do your test, you'll be fine. Get focused on where you
Yeah.
actually shine. So, yeah,
Hmm.
but definitely my military career ended up being the foundation of where I
Yeah.
am now, but it was a continuous trudge through imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I like about the two of you is just kind of it's this is a conversation that's hard to talk about, right? Because again, to other people, you're really accomplished and you've got all these accolades and you're doing wonderful things, but yet there's something inside of you that's just like, I don't know, I'm
Mhm.
doing this right. One of the high mark of imposter syndrome is this tendency to compare, right, to like a moving target, because we're like, oh, look at Mary, wow, Mary did that so much better, and the next thing you know, you're not looking at the people who maybe are at your same level, or you're not even thinking about what other people are saying to you, like, wow, Grace, you did amazing, or wow, Cynthia, you're so good at this. It's like we minimize those things, but the things that stick out are the one of two times where someone says, yeah, no, you may want to try that again, or can I give you a little feedback? And we say, yeah, you can give it. And then when they give the feedback, we're like, oh,
Correct.
it's
Yes.
just like it's completely crushed. We welcomed the feedback until it was given, and then it just kind of reinforced this idea of
Hmm.
like, man, I knew I was an imposter anyway.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think caused you to feel like an imposter in different situations? I know Cynthia led with kind of maybe some family influences. What for, if you wanted to add some more grace for you, what do you think made you feel like an imposter?
I'll actually connect it to this administrative position. I felt like, again, I was in the reserves while I was doing this. So I have two different government jobs, um, where it seemed like I wasn't really the one who was making like every time I got a promotion, I was surprised, genuinely
Mhm.
surprised. And we have
Yeah.
to do these write-ups, and I'm reading all these things, and I'm like, I don't remember. I really, like, was that even a big deal? Like you said, you don't really pay attention to these things. Um, I think it's one comparison was definitely a piece, because I think people felt like they knew who they were, they knew what they were doing, and they knew what their future looked like. And for me, I felt like I was just trying really hard to fit in. Um, our parents moved around a lot, so I'm used to having, maybe a couple of years in an elementary school, and then we moved to another one, and then da da da, and now we moved across the country. And so not having those like deep roots and that sense of self carried with me even into the military, which is supposed to be what, like, the world's largest fraternity, right? And so being who I am and still trying to figure out my place in whatever space I was in, it really affected the way I showed up. So as far as I was concerned, I just wanted to blend in and not be seen. And every time I didn't like stick up to my own standard, I felt like I stood out. I didn't, but I felt like I stood out. I felt like everyone could see that I had failed at something, or I didn't run as fast as someone else, or I didn't understand some concept as quickly. And so just trying to figure out who I was and not having that like reassurance of I know where I'm going with my day. I know where I'm going. I know where I belong in this world. That definitely carried through from my military career, being an administrative assistant. So,
Beautiful. Um, what about you, Cynthia? You mentioned family, environment, but are there other, what do you think caused you to feel that like an imposter in some way? Other examples or other causes?
Yeah, I think I struggled with it the most as a therapist,
Hmm. Okay.
right? Because there's so many disorders that you have to know, or I feel like I have to know it all and I don't, and so that makes me feel like, why are you even here? You don't even know, um what these acronyms are, or you don't even know this technique, or things like that. So that kind of makes me feel, it kind of just still kind of, it's like a continuous feeling that I have. But the evidence, like you said in the beginning, the evidence shows otherwise, because I will from time to time ask my clients, like, how do you think our session went? You know what I mean? And they're like, oh, I learned so much, and you've really been supportive, and I get all these great feedbacks, and I'm like, okay. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm doing it, like I'm doing this, I'm connecting with these people, I'm helping them.
Yeah.
With the help of supportive people like yourself, Dr. Simmons, and many others, I think that I just have to continue to just go along my path.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I always tell graduate students, early career therapists, psychologists, so forth and so on, to give it time, right? The expectation is not that we're gonna know all things at all times, And I think that's just a little note for if there's anyone out there, whether it's a therapist or whatever job you're in and you're thinking, man, I don't know as much. Something that is important to know is that experience matters. Some of those
Yeah.
things come with experience. Some things we learn in the classroom, other things we learn through experience, and to be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and allow yourself to just learn as you go. I kind of wanted to point out to a number of different factors that typically impacts imposter syndrome, right? So one of the big ones is family environment for sure. It's growing up in a household a lot of times where maybe people they wouldn't celebrate you as much as they would criticize you. The other thing is social pressures. There's this sense that, oh man, this person is 30 years old and they have accomplished so he's a multi-billionaire at 30. What are you doing with yourself? Kind of looking at this pressure to perform all the time, always be on go. We don't have to always be on go. In fact, our bodies need us to actually be able to rest and relax and calm down and restore, because that's how we repair ourselves to do it again the next day. um, Grace, you mentioned a sense of belonging, and that's a big one because we kind of want to fit in. We want to look like we got it together. Sometimes we don't. And when we don't, other people may not notice it, but in our minds we feel like we stick out like a sore thumb, and everyone's like, oh, but you blend in so well, you're such an extrovert, and in reality you're like, no, you clearly don't know me. If you knew me, you'd know I'm not that.
Yeah.
um Cinthia mentioned something about it being like so I take issue. I'm one of the folks that kind of take issue with it being called imposter syndrome, to be quite honest with you. I like to think of it as like imposter experience or imposter phenomenon, because I think it falls within the realm of normalcy to some extent. Sometimes your external environment, you both talked about work environments. I know, Grace, especially you, the work environment can make you feel like, okay, you don't belong. There are biases, there are discrimination, there are certain things that may apply to others that may not apply to you. There are certain leisures that are giving others that you aren't given. I know, like when you're in management, sometimes you're surrounded. For me, I know I felt this before, and this is way too familiar, where you're either the youngest or you're the only Black person, or it's a bunch of men and you're the only one, and you really don't feel like you belong. So sometimes it's not just an internal struggle, but rather that there are external factors that play into you feeling that way. So I kind of wanted to point that out, because I am strongly advocating for imposter experience or an imposter phenomenon, as opposed to it being a syndrome or an illness. So we're now towards the end, and I kind of want to ask you. We gave little breadcrumbs along the way, but how do you cope with imposter syndrome? How did you cope with it then? And if it still rears its ugly head every now and then, how do you cope with it now?
I'll start by imposter syndrome is definitely still present. The imposter experience is
Mhm.
definitely still present. Um, but I'm grateful. One, a practice that I did learn from the military is creating something called an I Love Me book. And that just
Ooh,
translates to putting up post-it notes or making little notes to myself about tiny, tiny little wins and accomplishments that I've done. And so being able to
yeah,
keep reminding myself of things that I have accomplished or conversations that I had or just positive things. It definitely, so if I am starting to doubt who I am and what I'm doing, I remember these things. Um, and then so a conversation I actually had a couple of weeks ago was I was trying to figure out like coordinating being a podcaster and running a business and trying to be a coach and all these different things. And I had someone who she looks like she has everything together. And I reached out to her and I was like, how do I do this? How do I put these pieces together? And she was like, well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a leadership development program manager, and these are the different things that I'm interested in. And she was like, it sounds like you have everything you need. And I was like,
mhm,
oh, okay. All right. So wasn't the advice that that I was expecting, but it was just like from an outside appearance because I've had to tell myself that you have everything you need. It's just time. And hearing someone else say it like, no, 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 I see that you have the experience that you're concerned that you don't actually have. you have the actual, like, the talent, you have the passion, you have the interest. So reminding myself constantly that this is something that I've been interested in for years. I'm finally putting it together, and it's going to take time. And definitely limiting my time on social media, because the thief of joy and creativity is trying to compare yourself to somebody else. And it's just constant
Yeah.
flashing of that. So being mindful of social media, purposely reminding myself, like, you're fine. You're doing okay. You're fine. Making sure I'm telling other people who I'm like, you know what? Let's do this together. Let me pull some, like, strength and encouragement from other people, because I want to make sure that we are actually all supportive or supported. Um, and as we go through these different issues, we have somebody that you can actually talk to. So that's how I stay ahead of it when it shows up.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I love that. Cinthia, how about you? How do you cope?
Um, I love that, Grace. I think I'm going to take your idea with the I Love Me book. I think that's amazing. That's great. I really just try to reassure myself. I'm also surrounded by a circle of friends that are very supportive. And, without me even knowing, I get their feedback, and it makes me feel like, okay, I know what I'm doing. Like Grace, like, you got this, just keep going, keep learning, keep growing, because nothing happens overnight. I also get the once in a while, like I said before, say, get the feedback of my clients, like, how are you doing, how do you feel that, I'm as a therapist, working with your, kind of issues, am I helping you in the way that you need me to help you? And getting their feedback just really reassures me, and that helps me.
I like that. I mean, you all hit the main points here in terms of what to do, how to cope with that. I guess a few things that I would add is the first thing that I encourage people to do is to, like, if you feel it in that moment, to just stop. Like,
Mm.
literally stop what you're doing, take a deep breath, because when emotions are high, logic is low. So when emotions are high, logic is low. I live by that. And breathing kind of allows you to be able to, like, reset for a second so that you can think more logically. Because when we're feeling like an imposter, you're anxious. You're kind of wound up internally. Maybe people can't see it on your face, but you certainly feel this internal turmoil, and you're just like, oh my God, I'm not doing this right, I'm not doing this right. And so all you're feeling is like you're caught up in this tornado of emotions. So it's important to just be able to stop for a second and just breathe. Once you breathe, you can then notice, like, okay, what's going on here? Let me evaluate the evidence for or against this particular thing that I'm thinking right now. What have people told me? What do I know to be true? What are my accomplishments? If you have a hard time finding things, because sometimes imposter syndrome can be so strong for some that it's really hard for them to identify their strengths. So call someone that knows you, that you can trust, and they will then tell you, "Listen, you're brilliant, you're kind, you're a good listener, you're a great friend." Write those things down and kind of keep them with you. I have something that I encourage people to have, which is similar to what Grace recommended. I just call it a compassion kit. And a compassion kit is very similar to an I love you book. It's about, okay, what are some, whether it's quotes, whether it's comments that people have said to you, things that you've accomplished, to in those moments where you really want to beat yourself up, to turn to your compassion kit and say, okay, I am a good human after all, or I did get this particular award, or I did work hard for this. I put in 18 hours for this, instead of being like, oh, it was just timing, or I just got
Mhm.
lucky. So to just look for moments where you can shower yourself with compassion, because it offsets that critical voice on the inside of you that's like, you're not good enough, you're inadequate in some way, you're not doing this right. But when the evidence proves otherwise, you can have a visual evidence to say, you know what, this is what the evidence says. And yes, indeed, I am not an imposter. Can I tell you something? And then maybe I can kind of like leave us with this, is that real imposters don't have imposter syndrome. They don't have a sense of, I don't belong here. Okay. So if you're feeling like an imposter, it is confirmation that you are not that, because real imposters do not experience imposter syndrome at all. All right. All right. Any last minute thoughts from the two of you?
I would just like to encourage people out there that are struggling with this to kind of listen to this, to kind of because I've learned a lot being here just by Dr. Simmons and Grace's, story and information. Just continue. Just continue, because each of us has a calling. That's what I believe. And just follow your path.
I love
And I love the adding to making sure you're following your path is be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Stop comparing yourself to other people, and just move at your own pace, because it's going to happen. Everything that you need is within you, and it'll happen.
I love that so much. And as we talked about comparison, one of my favorite quotes is, just be yourself. Everyone else is already taken.
Yep.
We spend so much time trying to be other people, when in reality, you're beautiful. You're wonderfully made. Everything you need is already inside of you. And there are people in your life that love, admire, and appreciate you just as you are. And you don't need to be anybody else but you. So that wraps up our first episode of the Bare Naked podcast. I am so honored that you, Grace, and Cinthia, that you decided to join us today. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation about imposter syndrome. Thank you for your authenticity. And again, we're going to advocate for changing it from imposter syndrome to imposter experience, because it truly is just an experience that's rooted in a whole bunch of other things. All right. So to our audience, if you enjoyed today's episode, please share, like, and subscribe. And then if you're watching this on, if you're listening to this on Spotify, please make sure to answer our questions there. And if you are watching on YouTube, please leave a comment. We really, really appreciate it. I personally am looking for comments. So leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts about this particular episode, and also what you would like to know more about, because remember, it's our journey. We're taking it together. Again, thank you all so much for your time and for hanging out with us. Until next time.